The courtroom was the largest hall in the galactic capital. It's built from crystal walls that reached higher than the tallest human skyscraper. Thousands of alien eyes stared from the gallery, their bodies crowded on tiered seats, their voices buzzing. In excitement, trial was the event of the century, the first time a human had ever been brought alive before the Supreme Court of the Galactic Union. Guards in silver armor stood at every doorway, their weapons ready, but their postures were relaxed. To them, the prisoner was not a threat. She was just a human, primitive from a violent little world. Captain Mara Vance stood alone in the center of the hall, her wrists locked by glowing energy cuffs. A white beam of light shone on her from above, casting the rest of the room into dim shadow. Her boots were scuffed, her uniform torn, and yet she stood straight, shoulders squared, eyes steady. The judge's bench towered above her, a line of 9 alien elders sitting on thrones of silver and glass, their eyes glittering like cold gemstones. The chief judge spoke in a deep, clicking voice that echoed across the chamber. He listed her crimes: destruction of protected fleets, interference in sovereign territories, the illegal rescue of enslaved species, the annihilation of several planetary garrisons. With each charge, the crowd grew louder. It wasn't outrage, it was laughter. Loud, rolling laughter from creatures with mouths full of fangs, beaks, and mandibles. To them, her so-called achievements were impossible. Human ship against their fleets, a single captain outsmarting their admirals. The very idea was absurd. Even the guards beside her smirked. One leaned closer and whispered, "Enjoy your last day, little predator." His alien breath smelled like metal and burned. Ozone Mara didn't react. Her eyes stayed locked on the chief judge, who was enjoying the spectacle. "She is not even worth the cost of this trial," one of the judges said, making the crowd laugh harder. Another judge added, "A death sentence is too generous. Let it. Send her back to her world with our flag burned into her sky." The chamber roared with approval. The sound rose until it was almost painful, bouncing off the glass walls. Drowning out the faint hum of the court's machinery, Mara remained still. She didn't flinch when insults were shouted from the gallery. She didn't lower her gaze when the judge accused her of being an uncivilized animal that stumbled into a war she could never win. Her breathing was slow, her expression unreadable. Only the faint twitch of her jaw hinted at the storm beneath her calm. Finally, the chief judge raised one long, clawed hand for silence. "Before we pass sentence, human," he said, his voice dripping with mock respect. "The court will grant you one last chance to speak. Do not waste it. This is your final moment in the eyes of the galaxy." The laughter faded into a low murmur as all eyes turned to her. Mara's boots made the faintest sound on the polished floor as she took one step forward. The light above caught the sharp line of her cheekbones, the thin scar running down her temple. Her gaze swept the hall slowly, meeting the eyes of the crowd, the guards, the judges. It was the look of someone who had already decided the fate of everyone in the room. She opened her mouth to speak, and the silence became absolute. Even the ventilation fans seemed to pause. Her voice, when it came, was calm, even, and carried without effort to the farthest seats in the gallery. It was not loud, but it had a weight to it, a steady confidence that made every ear lean closer. She said only 9 words. The moment they left her lips, the change was instant. The laughter didn't fade. It stopped, as if someone had cut the sound out of the air. Faces turned pale. Some froze entirely, eyes wide in disbelief. Several officers in the gallery pulled out communication devices, their claws tapping frantically. The chief judge's head tilted slightly, confusion clouding his expression. Mara stood exactly where she was, her hands still bound, her shoulders still relaxed. But in the charged silence that followed, it was suddenly clear to everyone in the hall that the human standing before them was not afraid. Whatever she had just said, it was not a threat. It was a promise. The words hung in the air like a blade, sharp and heavy. "Your fleets are gone. Your son is next." At first there was no reaction, as if the room itself didn't understand. Then the silence cracked. Guards' comling chimed with a high-pitched warning tone. Another officer in the gallery suddenly rose, his eyes locked on the glowing data screen in his palm. The judges glanced at one another, their expressions shifting from mockery to a faint, creeping unease. "This is a lie," the chief judge snapped, his claws tapping the bench. "Human trickery. She seeks to frighten us." But his voice wavered ever so slightly. The words human trickery sounded less certain when the officers in the room were whispering urgently to one another, scaled fingers flying across control. PADS reports began coming in, fragmented, rushed, and panicked. Entire fleets had gone dark. The first Outer Rim fleet, gone. The Eastern Vanguard, gone. The pride of the core fleet destroyed with no distress calls. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. These were their strongest war groups, scattered across different sectors, all erased in less than an hour. The chief judge slammed his clawed fist on the bench. "How do you know this?" he demanded. His voice echoed, but Mara didn't flinch. Her bound hand shifted slightly, the cuffs glowing faintly in the dim light. "I told them to wait for my signal," she said, her tone casual, almost conversational. "You captured me, I sent it." The gallery erupted into a low wave of disbelief and fear. Some aliens hissed at her, others shouted for her immediate execution. A few began to leave their seats, checking their coms, shouting orders to unseen. "Forces outside." The chief judge leaned forward, his face close to the mic. "You expect us to believe you can destroy fleets from this room? Without weapons? Without ships?" Mara tilted her head. "Believe what you want. They're already gone. The only reason your home still breathes is because I'm still standing here." The words struck harder than any weapon. The guards at her side shifted uneasily. Their eyes darted toward the massive crystal windows that overlooked the skyline of the capital world. Bright streaks of light crossed the horizon to many. To be simple trade ships, too fast. To direct, a younger judge, his voice trembling, spoke up. We have a report. The fleet guarding the core system is under attack. The attackers, they are unidentified, small, fast. Black holes, no transponder codes." He swallowed.
"No survivors reported from the first engagement. ...
Chief Judge's claws tightened around the bench until the glass groaned. "End this trial," he ordered. "Remove her. Execute her now." But the order came too late. Outside, beyond the crystal walls, a distant explosion lit the skyline. The tremor that followed reached the floor beneath their feet. Mara didn't look at the fire. She kept her eyes locked on the bench above her. "You still think this is a trial?" she said softly. "It's already a verdict." The deep, rising wail of the city's alarm drowned out every voice in the courtroom. Harsh red lights began to pulse along the high crystal walls, turning the once pristine chamber into a hall of shadows and blood-colored glass. A voice echoed. From the public address system, in a language not meant for human ears, clipped, urgent, panicked. Even without knowing the words, anyone could feel what they meant. The capital was under attack. Guards who had stood lazily before now moved. With desperate speed, weapons were drawn. Comlinks lit up with frantic orders, and armored boots pounded against the shining floor. The gallery, filled moments ago with arrogant laughter, became a storm of shouts and rushing bodies. Alien civilians clawed at each, other to reach the exits. Few stumbled in the chaos, trampled by the tide. The judges stayed in their thrones, but the false calm was gone from their faces. Their eyes shifted constantly to the massive glass wall behind Mara, where the city skyline was clearly visible. Outside, the air was alive with streaks of fire and smoke. Small black shapes darted through the sky, weaving between the tall towers' ships. But not like any the capital had seen before. They moved too fast, too low, their hulls reflecting nothing, like shadows with engines, wherever they passed. Alien defense towers erupted into fire. The chief judge's voice cracked as he shouted, "Seal the chamber! Lock every level of the compound!" Heavy blast doors began sliding shut with a grinding hum. The high-arched entrances to the courtroom sealed one by one, trapping those inside. Mara still hadn't moved from the center of the hall. The red light gave her face a sharp, almost carved look, and her eyes, steady and unblinking, were locked on the chaos. One of the older judges turned toward her sharply. "Call them off," he barked. "Stop this, and we will. We will reconsider your sentence." Mara tilted her head slightly. "You still think I came here to stop them?" Her voice was calm, almost too quiet against the noise, yet it carried. "To every corner of the chamber, I came here to watch." A sudden, deafening boom tore through the city outside, shaking the entire structure. Dust fell from the high beams of the courtroom, and one of the crystal panels in the wall cracked in a spiderweb pattern. Through that cracked glass, a larger shape entered the battle, a black warship, triangular and jagged like a blade descending. From the clouds, the defense forces tried to respond. Dozens of alien fighters swarmed it, their energy weapons lighting up the sky. But the black warship's return fire was precise, merciless. In seconds, half the defending craft were nothing, but burning trails falling into the city below. Inside the courtroom, panic climbed to a fever pitch. A group of soldiers rushed forward toward Mara, but the chief judge barked for them to stop. Perhaps even he knew that rushing her now was pointless. Perhaps he was beginning to understand. Mara finally took a step forward, her boots clicking. Against the trembling floor, she looked up at the bench, her voice steady and cold. "I told you," she said. "This isn't a trial. This is judgment." Outside, the black warship fired again, and the glass wall of the courtroom lit up with the reflection of an entire defense station exploding in brilliant white fire. The shockwave hit a second later, making the crystal walls groan and the gallery scream in terror and still. Mara didn't move. The blast doors that sealed the courtroom shuddered under a heavy, rhythmic impact. At first, it sounded like distant thunder, but each strike grew louder, sharper, until the metal began to bend inward. The guards in silver armor turned their weapons toward the door, forming a defensive line. Their clawed hands trembled on the triggers. The chief judge barked orders, his voice high with panic. "Hold the chamber. Nothing enters." But even as he spoke, the final blow landed. With a sound like tearing steel, the blast door crumpled inward, ripped from its frame. Smoke and sparks poured into the room. Through the haze, dark figures emerged. They moved like predators, low, fast, silent. Their armor was matte black, edges sharp, shapes almost blending into the shadows. No insignias, no names, but just the cold gleam of their visors. Their steps were in perfect sync, not a single wasted movement. They didn't shout, they didn't threaten. They simply advanced, weapons held steady, as if the entire room already belonged to them. The guards opened fire first. Blue energy bolts lit the air, striking the black-armored intruders, but the shots either glanced off their plating or were avoided entirely within human speed. The humans, for there was no doubt now who they were, returned fire in short, precise bursts. Each shot found a target. Alien guards fell where they stood, their weapons clattering to the floor. The gallery erupted into a frenzy. Zillions screamed, trying to climb over each other to reach the higher exits. Judges barked frantic orders to evacuate, but the black-armored soldiers ignored them completely. They moved with a single focus, cutting through the guard line until the path to the center of the chamber was clear. Mara stood in that very center, still bound, still calm. One of the soldiers approached her, pressed a control on the cuffs, and the glowing restraints flickered out. She flexed her wrists slowly, as if she had all the time in the world. The chief judge found his voice again, though it cracked under the weight of the moment. "You will stop this madness. Is an assault on the Supreme Court itself. Every world in the Union will watch," Mara interrupted, her voice cutting through the noise. "Ah!" "And they will see what you've hidden." At her signal, one of the soldiers tapped a device on his gauntlet. The high walls of the courtroom shimmered as hundreds of tiny holoprojectors activated. Suddenly, the air was filled with images, stolen records, classified footage, intercepted communications. Entire alien colonies in chains. Human settlements burned and stripped of resources. Civilians, men, women, children, taken from there. Homes and sold to the highest bidder. Gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the gallery. Even some of the alien spectators who had mocked her hours earlier stared at the images in horror. The broadcasts weren't limited to the courtroom across the galaxy. Every major channel had been hijacked, streaming the trial live along. With the evidence, Mara walked toward the judge's bench, her soldiers parting to let her pass. The chief judge tried to stand, but the barrel of a black rifle pressed gently against his chest kept him in place. "You sit here pretending to be the highest authority in the galaxy," Mara said, her voice low but steady. "But your justice is built on chains and blood. You hide behind your laws, and you call it peace." She leaned forward slightly. "I'm here to end it." Her words were not shouted, but the cold certainty in them made the room feel smaller, tighter. The black-armored soldiers stood like statues, their weapons never wavering, their silent presence more threatening than any roar of battle. Outside the shattered wall, the black warship hovered closer, its shadow falling across the entire building. The fight for the capital was still raging, but inside this hall, the outcome had already been decided. The chamber felt like it was holding its breath. The screams from the gallery had faded into uneasy silence. Only the low hum of the black warship outside and the faint crackle of damaged circuits filled the air. The judges sat frozen on their silver thrones, their eyes locked on Mara as if staring at a predator that had just stepped into the cage. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, until she stood directly beneath the chief judge's towering seat. Her soldiers stayed spread across the room, silent sentinels, their rifles still aimed at any guard foolish enough to move. The giant hollow projections of the Union's crimes still floated in the air, spinning slowly, a quiet reminder of the galaxy's ugly truth. The chief judge swallowed hard. His voice, once dripping with arrogance, was thin and pleading now. "You have made your point, human. This war does not have to go further. You can grant your species autonomy, territory, trade rights." Mara's eyes narrowed, and the faintest curl of a smile touched her lips. "You think this is about a bargain?" she asked softly. "You think I came here to negotiate?" Another judge leaned forward urgently. "There can be peace. The fleets will stand down. You can't undo the graves," Mara cut in. Her voice stayed calm, but there was steel beneath it, sharp and unyielding. "You can't undo the children taken from their homes, the cities burned, the lives erased, because they didn't fit into your empire's perfect order. You built your power on the belief that no one could touch you. Today, that ends." The chief judge's claws dug into the arms of his throne. "If you destroy us, you will unite the galaxy against your people. There will be no place for humans." To hide, Mara glanced at the shattered crystal wall, at the dark warship casting its shadow over the entire court. Her voice was quiet when she spoke again, but every word landed like a hammer. "We're not hiding." She reached into the pocket of her torn uniform and pulled out a small black device, no bigger than a thumb. She held it between two fingers and turned it slightly, letting the red emergency light glint off its surface. "These," she said, "are the last words you'll hear from me." Her soldiers shifted slightly, watching her hand. The judges leaned back as if the device might bite them. Mara pressed her thumb down on the activation stud. Somewhere far above the city, in the cold void beyond the clouds, dozens of human ships received the signal at once. Perfect unison, their weapons rotated toward a single target, the primary star of the core system. The first blast was almost beautiful, a ripple of light dancing across the sun's surface. The second tore deep into it. And the third began the collapse. Inside the courtroom, an alarm began to scream, not the city's alarm, but a warning from the planetary core network. Energy readings spiked beyond anything recorded history. Scientists on the capital world would later call it a forced stellar destabilization. Mara simply called it what it was: execution. "You had your trial," she said, lowering her hand. "Now comes the sentence." Through the cracked glass, the star began to swell, its golden light turning a fierce, unnatural white. The first waves of heat slammed into the planet's atmosphere. The judges sat frozen, their power meaningless now. Mara turned to her soldiers. Time to leave. The air in the courtroom shimmered with heat as the planet's shields began to fail. Outside the shattered wall, the sun was no longer a steady golden sphere. It was a roaring, expanding inferno, each pulse brighter than the last. The glow washed over the capital city, turning the skyline into black silhouettes against a wall of fire. Mara didn't look back at the judges. She didn't need to. Their voices were gone now. No shouts, no threats, no bargains. Just silence. Some sat frozen on their thrones, eyes wide, unable to comprehend the death rushing toward them. Others had collapsed into themselves, shaking, their robes stained with fear. Her soldiers moved with the same calm precision they had when entering. Two broke off toward the far side of the chamber, planting small black beacons along the wall. With a low hum, a tier in space began to form an extraction gate. The rip widened until it was tall enough for the team to pass through. Beyond it, the faint metallic outlines of a human dropship waited. The first shockwave hit. The crystal. Walls groaned and cracked. Dust rained down from the high arches. Somewhere deep in the city, a tower collapsed, its fall swallowed by the roar of the coming nova. The gallery seats were empty now. Those who had fled earlier would never make it far. Mara stepped through the room without haste, her boots clicking on the trembling floor. One soldier offered her a helmet, but she shook her head. She wanted to feel the last breath of the court on her skin. At the gate's threshold, she paused. She glanced over her shoulder at the hall, once the proud heart of the Galactic Union, now a tomb. "The court," she said quietly, "is adjourned." With that, she stepped through the gate. The portal sealed behind her with a final flash of blue light. The dropship carried her up through the smoke-filled sky, breaking through the atmosphere into the cold safety of space. Below, the capital world was already losing its shape, its oceans boiling away, its continents burning. Above, the sun split in a blinding surge, collapsing into itself before exploding outward in a storm of light and fire. The waves swept over the planet, and in an instant, the seat of the Union was gone. Mara walked to the viewing deck of her flagship, the massive black warship that had hovered like a shadow over the city. Through the thick glass, she watched the debris scatter into the void. Around her, the bridge crew worked silently, every movement disciplined and precise. One of her officers approached. "Orders, Captain?" Her eyes stayed on the fading light where the capital had been. "Set a course for the next target," she said. "Justice isn't finished yet." The officer nodded and moved to relay the command. The engines rumbled, the stars outside beginning to drift as the warship turned. Mara stood with her hands behind her back, the reflection of the dying sun still burning in her eyes. Far behind them, the Galactic Union had lost its heart, and in the silence that followed, the galaxy began to understand. The age of human fear was over.